The fact is that public religion seems to be an inescapable feature of life. The definition of the good taken by the public and its institutions seems to be an inevitable part of how humans organise and think. And I think the woke phenomenon kind of gave us a steer in this direction because it showed that there can be people beholden to this sort of stuff, and then it starts to trickle into the institutions.
I'm Rob Forsyth, and this is Liberalism in Question, a series of podcasts from us at the Centre for Independent Studies. We look at some of the issues surrounding classical liberalism, its strengths, its weaknesses, its nature, and its threats and alternatives. Today, I'm going to ask one of the really big questions about liberalism. Can liberalism be genuinely secular? I raised this question with my guest, Rohan McHugh, who works with John Anderson in his podcast program, as well as have served as a political staffer. Because earlier this year, 2025, I read an article in The Australian by Roger Partridge from the New Zealand Initiative, critiquing some things that Jordan Peterson had said at an ARC conference. Peterson has implied that liberalism was somehow incomplete and needed a broader foundation. Partridge defended liberalism as not needing that, and then Rohan came in and, in a sense, in his own way, tried to correct Partridge towards the direction of Peterson. Welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Nice to be here.
Let me start with a quote from Francis Fukuyama's, I think, excellent book, Liberalism and Its Discontents. And he talks about why liberalism is good. He says three reasons. One is it economically works better. Two is it's a great philosophy for acknowledging human dignity. But thirdly, or rather he puts it firstly, quote, classical liberalism can be therefore understood as an institutional solution to a problem of governing over diversity, or to put it slightly in different terms, of peaceably managing diversity in pluralistic societies. And that is why, he goes on, liberalism lowers the temperature of politics by taking questions of final ends off the table. You can believe what you want, but you must do it in private life and not to seek to impose your views on fellow citizens. What's wrong with that?
Nothing entirely. I would say that I'm happy to talk about liberalism as offering a lot of fruitful components that we should acknowledge. I think part of the concern I have is that liberalism is just simply incomplete, and that's something I mentioned in the piece that you alluded to earlier. And that is that liberalism confers and protects the fourfold freedoms we think about and enjoy in the West.
Freedom of
conscience, religion, association, and speech. All marvellous and essential if we want to preserve, I think, one of the greatest things that the West has, which is ideas where iron sharpen iron, and we truly have the freedom to innovate, and we can associate and we can believe what we want to believe. And all those things, as far as they go, are fine. I suppose when I was thinking about Roger Partridge's contribution in that piece, I was thinking his criticisms of Peterson didn't take into account the fact that we don't just exist in a historical bubble. We exist in a time and place in history, and there's a lot of antecedents that we should honour that have produced the conditions that we enjoy. And so where did those fourfold freedoms come from?
And your answer is?
Well, I would say that as you go back, you begin in the Enlightenment, don't you, with John Locke and John Stuart Mill after him. But you have to think about the conditions these men were in. They were thoroughly embedded in a West that was beginning to think more deeply about what it meant to have individual ability to contribute something that came out of a tradition that wants to say that the conscience matters and that ideas matter, that there's an ordered world in which we live in. And the question is, well, how did we receive this ordered world? And what were the historical conditions and frameworks that allowed people to conclude that an ordered world was there, to investigate and then to effectively land on these kinds of freedoms as good for humanity? So it depends how far back you go. You can go then before the Enlightenment all the way to the enshrining of Christianity in the Roman Empire under the Emperor Theodosius. So I would say that as you go far back enough in the West, then you start to realise where all of this came from. The people built from somewhere.
And I take your point. In fact, in this series, we've constantly dealt with the question, is liberalism a contingent upon a certain political historical context, or is it somehow universal? And on the whole, I think people have said it may have universal application, but it's its unique property of Western Europe, Christendom, and also the classical world as well feeding into that. I think that's not in question. The question is, why is it incomplete today? You said it was incomplete. What's incomplete about it?
Well, I think what's incomplete now is that we see some of the effects of liberalism that are not so good. Some of those would be the confusion of freedom with license. And I would say that liberalism doesn't know how to adjudicate those two things very well. So licentiousness, I think, is not a healthy definition of freedom, but I do think liberalism struggles to, again, adjudicate what qualifies as licentiousness, or maybe more importantly, to encourage people to pull back from it and say, well, this isn't just about maximising your freedom to express your individualism. This is actually something deeply destructive. And history and the origins of liberalism, I think, help give the scaffolding that makes sense of that.
The question really is, though, liberalism, I think, is incomplete. I'm going to agree with you on this. At least certain forms of it are, rather than a complete philosophy of life. It's an arrangement. It's an arrangement to live in a society where we don't agree about the big issues. For example, Fukuyama says, now this is an interesting quote, this is my view, you may disagree with it, and I hope you do actually. The substantive conservative critique, I think I'm going to give this one, of liberalism, that liberal societies provide no strong common moral horizon around which communities can be built, is true enough. This is indeed a feature, not a bug of liberalism. The question for conservatives, and I'll put this to you now, Hugh, is whether there are a realistic way to roll back the secularism of contemporary liberal societies and impose a thicker moral order. I think you're right. Liberalism is commonly understood, and I think more with rule of law, limited government, property rights, as much as the freedoms you've mentioned, is a way we've got arrangement in the West to cope and get on where we don't agree. And it's an alternative to the Europe that preceded it, where the government enforced a worldview. Now I'm saying, well, this may be incomplete, but isn't that better than what came before? We have freedom now.
We have freedom, and I'm not disputing that. I would say that, as I said before, though, I think we don't know what freedom is, because the way we understand it now is not the way it's been historically understood, which I think was much more ordered towards a much greater sense of ethical vitality. So, for example, this goes all the way back to Thomas Aquinas. Freedom is seen as an ordered good where you reflect upon the gifts that you've been given, and then you direct them towards good ends. So you actually have the ability to see freedom not simply as do what I like in an unbridled, unconstrained way, but you actually get to enjoy things that you wouldn't otherwise enjoy unless you had those limitations in place. An example would be marriage. I cannot enjoy the beauty and the goodness of marriage unless I limit myself to one man or one woman. And so I would say that's an example of an institution that is under, I would say, question now, and that liberalism starts to disintegrate what's been
when you
given.
say how is liberalism doing that? What do you take liberalism to be when you say it's causing a disintegration?
Well, I would say it enables the conditions.
But what is it that is enabling? What's the nature of liberalism in your point of view?
Well, the nature, I think, would be a view that you maximise freedom, except for, and this is sort of taken from Mill, that which causes harm to others.
Right,
now,
okay.
I think that's worthy of exploration. I would say that one of the problems is that was good as far as it goes. Mill was talking about that in particular conditions within a particular time in history. What we've done, though, is that we're now struggling to really define harm, because it's now moved away from what I think Mill's intentions were, which is we're now moving into something that goes from physical harm to psychological harm. So Thomas Jefferson said, what difference does it make if my neighbour believes in one God or 1,000 gods? It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Right?
Yes, okay, that's a classic liberal approach, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, but I would say, indeed, of its day. But and I mentioned this in the piece, Jefferson, in spite of the fact that he had his own Bible that denuded the supernatural contents of things like Christology, he still thought that the Christian moral framework is the most excellent deposit for the future of the West, or for Western civilization. But my simple point is to say that we've moved away from that view of Jefferson towards something that's much more difficult to pinpoint. And I think that liberalism provides the conditions where we struggle to not allow a more therapeutic society to start adjudicating psychological harm, and then in many ways then making that part of our culture, and then concerningly part of our laws.
And I think was Mill talking about morality or about the law? That's the first question. Free to do, don't harm others. He was, I think, was he a utilitarian? I think he was, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Grandfather was. Because I want to distinguish liberalism and morality. I'll come back to that in just a moment with you.
Sure.
You said liberalism allows license. I guess if you make liberalism purely a morality, do what you like. But then you complained that because Mill said, do what I like except where it harms others, he had a very narrow view of harm compared to today. Today, the harm has become the only, almost in some cases, the only moral category in our society, and it expanded. And you're concerned that that means a restriction, a legal restriction on people, because all things like mustn't harm others means that my freedom is being limited. Am I right?
Well, I'm saying that that particular definition of harm, I think, has only favoured one view. So my point there is to say that it's self-defeating, that you can't actually maximise freedom when you start to adjudicate things that start to offend things that are embedded in liberal sensibilities. So,
is liberalism a moral or a merely procedural process?
I guess I would say it's. I see it. I see the overlap there. I'm not sure if I make really firm distinctions.
I know someone said in the American Foundation that we need for this new society to develop, a liberal society, we need moral men, moral people, he meant. And there is a sense in which liberalism, a way in which you order your society to maximise individual responsibility and freedom, but in itself it requires moral people.
That's right.
And liberalism won't give you that.
No, that's right. And so I think liberalism's sort of all we have. So people kind of, I think.
But is it? No, that's my point.
Yeah.
Is it all we have? Surely I'm actually a Christian. Others may be atheists. We have all different. Even here at the SAIS, we have a range of very different views. Liberalism allows those different views to exist with each other. None of us are going to make liberalism itself the whole thing.
No, but I wonder if they allow for the basis upon which you can adjudicate what one path among many kind of sense of destiny. I find that tricky. That
who's the you and what does adjudicate mean?
Oh, I mean, like when it comes down to the freedom people have to form through individual choices their own destiny. I'm saying I don't know if it can adjudicate between good and bad choices as well.
But we don't need to adjudicate. Liberalism doesn't adjudicate. That's the point of liberalism, isn't it? It says to the society,
I guess I'm saying
we're not going to compel you. It's up to you.
That's the effect of liberalism, I think. Without a kind of acknowledgement of the historical conditions that should be acknowledged that are part of the Western tradition. Yeah.
But liberalism says personal responsibility. You take responsibility for your life. Now, you may want to be a believing Christian. You may want to be something else, but you take responsibility. The state's not going to tell you what you should believe.
No, and I think that's a problem. I think that's what I'm sort of saying, that Peterson was coming back to say, I don't think that's the stuff of that's going to preserve the goodness, truth and beauty that we have benefited from in the West.
Okay, then we come back to Fukuyama's question,
yep.
Which is, how do you overcome that without compulsion?
Well, I think that's actually one of the difficulties, because the use of compulsion can be a bit tendentious. So,
just a little.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think there's a difference between talking about, despotic regimes that are tyrannical, like, the Soviet Union, where it kind of, says this is the ideological view and we will coerce you.
A modern version of a, yes,
right.
I think, yes.
That's very different from talking about the ordered freedom that has a basis in Western history, that has a proven fruitfulness. That is to say, the Christian tradition, I would say, that's at the heart of, and this is why I would subscribe to Burkean conservative thought, because I think it still enables the flexibility necessary to accept ideas that are good, but I don't think it's mired in the kind of I suppose the amoral issues that. Yeah.
Look, I take that point of view. I'm not denying that. I'm pushing a bit further back at what the program would look like. I tell you what, it seems to me that in the West, we'll stay with this because I'm more ignorant than ever on other parts of the country, of the world. In the West, until 17th, 18th century, it was taken for granted that the government or the authorities would prescribe what the good was, how one was to live. I'm just reading at the moment that marvellous book by Peter Marshall, Heretics and Believers on the English Reformation. The shocking thing about the book is not the disagreements about theology, it's the way it's taken for granted that the government can enforce theological belief, in this case with violence. It was taken for granted, by the way, both sides. Today, we think that's abhorrent, that the government should enforce belief by compulsion. And that's the liberalism arose, I think, partly in reaction to the authority of the church, I say so, as himself an ordained minister. My question to you is, therefore, if the government's not going to prescribe a metaphysic or a theology, how can you avoid the country necessarily being secular?
The government doesn't have to proscribe, but the government, and this gets into some interesting questions of statecraft that theologians and such are discussing now. But the fact is that public religion seems to be an inescapable feature of life. So I'm not saying religion in the sense of an organised church. I'm saying that the definition of the good taken by the public and its institutions seems to be an inevitable part of how humans organise and think. And so I think the consequence of that is that you will have a metaphysic. And I think the woke phenomenon kind of gave us a steer in this direction because it showed that there can be people beholden to this sort of stuff, and then it starts to trickle into the institutions.
Because you could hardly say that was liberal in the sense of freedom of choice. The opposite was prescriptive, all kinds of levels. So you believe that, and this is your critique about my view, which is a fundamental pluralist society. You're saying, in fact, pluralism doesn't exist.
Well, it's ultimately self-defeating because, I mean, what I was saying and alluding to earlier is that it depends on what you pluralise. So if you're pluralising a kind of, I want one way among many in the way I see how to maximise freedom and human flourishing, well, then this is why I was talking about the ideas of Mill and such existing in certain conditions. Why can't people start to pluralise jurisprudence and questions of anthropology and this kind of thing? And I think that's what we saw. Eventually you start to sort of say the bedrock in which liberalism, pluralism can thrive eventually will be subject to the same questioning and pluralism that it's sort of cutting off the branch it's sitting on eventually. And that's one of my critiques. Yeah.
So you're saying that two things, I think, I want to try and bring them out. One is, I think, Friedrich Nietzsche's point, which I've always admired actually, that you can't have Christian morality without Christianity in some form. And he critiqued those like George Eliot and others in the 19th century who want to keep the goodies of the Christian faith out, a bit like the Bowlerized Bible you mentioned. And that argument would be to undercut the Christian or background, then liberalism itself has no foundation and will crumble. That's that one argument, or ought to crumble. Although some might say, having been launched by Christianity, it may have its own momentum.
Yes, so it's not so much that, because as I said, it's not as if I think liberalism is bad. I say it's incomplete because I don't think it has the resources within itself to sustain itself. And I think that for me is just something that you have to say, well, what gave rise to liberalism in the first place? And that's where you think you have to start going further back.
And that, it seems to me, is the great question. Does it have the resources in itself to sustain itself? Because it's under threat in many parts of the world today. At the same time, you're saying there is, not only is liberalism complete, there is something else out there called a public religion, which is inevitable, you say. One public religion? My theory is it's not pluralist, but one implicit public religion. that what you're saying?
I'm saying that, again, it's not a question of religion being used in the specific sense.
No, I understand. You're not talking about organised religion. You're talking about a transcendent view of
correct, like
of
a metaphysic.
Metaphysic.
Yeah,
and you're saying that whether you like it or not, we've got one. The only question is which one we have.
Yes, that's right. And I'm saying that we should consider the one that has demonstrably given us so many benefits.
So we should try the one we used to have.
Indeed, and I think that is just simply a question of corollary. How far back do you go and you look at what we had? Again, it's not supposed to be a one that lacks all criticism, as if we can't learn and innovate. But I think that would be one of the ways I would defend Burke and conservative.
Come back to my question is, let me grant all that for a minute. Let me grant your entire case and ask this question. How do you get this public religion? By what means does it occur? And by what means could you change it? Because a liberal would say, one thing I don't want is the state to change it. I don't want the state to mandate it. I want the state to give me freedom.
Yes.
Now, what's your pushback to that?
Well, I think I don't know if they know what they mean by freedom, because I think eventually they're going to have to start to reflect on the fact that there's many different kinds, and it might be the kind of freedom that isn't good for them. And the other thing I would say is that we would promote truth, beauty, and goodness, and hope to persuade. I'm not, I'm there to, get into the coercive game, but I'm saying that I would say that the proven fruit of certain institutions, certain ways of life, particularly in the West, it's difficult to suggest that we are not distinct in our cultural goodness relative to other cultures when you just look at the fruit. That's not an attempt to impugn needlessly. I'm just trying to say there's something there that is excellent and worth preserving, and people, I think, often just are not aware of those historical truths. They haven't probably studied, the history of the West.
So, Rohan, what's your program then?
Well,
you say we do this. I'm not who the we, but what's the program to restore a more healthy public religion, as it were, to enable liberalism, incomplete though it is, to truly thrive?
Very difficult question. I would say, if it is true that Christianity is at the heart of a lot of this, I would say that the church needs to do some work in trying to communicate the fruitful life of those who claim that they do have a metaphysic which gives, I suppose, a sense of purpose to freedom, but also gives more meaning to the freedoms that we enjoy now. So, freedom for things. You are made in, in the Christian sense. You are made in the image of God, and you have. There is a blueprint there of goods to pursue and things to evade.
I think many people have read and enjoyed Tom Holland's Dominion, and it's a number of books with a similar thesis, which is that we're all Christians in one sense, whether you believe in God or not. I think Christianity is rubbish or not. Deep down, our sensibility, Tom argues, in fact, I would argue even the woke sensibility is fundamentally Christian, because it's complaining about inequality for individual freedom, which would be other cultures regarded, what are you talking about? Now, in that case, our society is already still deeply Christian.
Yep.
We already have so it's not as bad as you think.
No, well, Tom Holland talks about modernity and maybe even woke as a kind of Christian heresy.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so he says that all of this relies upon these things that came before to, in order to
maybe very annoying for some people to know that. They don't want to be that, but that's what we are.
Indeed, and it's a helpful thesis just to recognise that there is a strand that runs through history that he has unpacked, and to say that he has acknowledged that he is thoroughly Christian in his sentiments, in that sense, in the sense that he is geared towards the Christian moral framework and is actually glad.
Well, therefore, don't we already have the proper, I think is, if that's the public religion, hidden though it might be from us, unacknowledged, denied by many, shouldn't you relax then?
Well, I would say it's one mechanism to remind people, but I would say very few people have reckoned with Tom's thesis, and most people have not. They don't have an intellectual understanding of these things. And so we're really talking about the institutions, how do average people engage with these ideas and understand the origins of them,
Rohan, do we need to know the origins? Isn't it better just to have the beliefs?
Yeah, I mean...
This is my fundamental question.
Sure.
I believe that in human dignity, it may have originated or individuality in medieval Europe from the Catholic Church and so forth, and then the reaction against some of the powers. Do I need to know the history to hold on to it?
No, I think the history just gives it further credibility in a way, because the study of history shows those origins. That's all I mean, and gives the cause and effect nature of them. But the beliefs themselves, of course, that would be the mechanism I would say that you would use to persuade people. Let's go back to the sacred texts that are at the heart of the West and say, what do they offer? Is what they teach good for us? Do we have people exemplifying that and showing that they are indeed consistent with human flourishing?
So your thesis and your hope is that we agree liberalism is incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
I'm arguing with Fukuyama it's a way of managing pluralism. You're not denying that in some measure, I take it?
No, I'm not entirely. I'm happy to identify.
But you want to add, not at one level, not pluralism, because there's an underlying, unacknowledged but real metaphysic in the society which is needed for liberalism to survive.
Well, that's
or the opposite, to be destroyed by the wrong.
Yeah, and that's the Western story. And I think that there's a lot of. We can take this in many different directions, Rod. But liberalism can produce illiberalism when people say things like, "I want people to be free to," or "I want to protect freedom of speech by legislating anti-vilification laws." Like, I don't want people to feel cowed in saying what they mean. And this sort of logic, which I think, these sorts of little things that we're seeing now, I think are unhelpful. Yeah.
I don't think they're little. I think it's a fundamental issue in the whole issue of liberalism, is how to defend it against attack in a way that doesn't destroy its nature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This I think is a fundamental, not contradiction, but tension within the very nature of the project.
Yes,
it seems to me.
That's right.
Not just about anti-vilification laws, but all kinds of issues. I protect your freedom. That means your freedom. It's not your freedom to murder this person. That's not a freedom you have. Mm-hmm. But then the question of what is harm grows. It's a fundamental contradiction, I think, in it has to be lived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I ask, are you optimistic about the future of liberalism then? Or are you pessimistic? Or better question, are you hopeful? Pessimistic is asking you about your personality. I mean, are you hopeful or not?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think liberalism has challenges. So I would say I'm probably more pessimistic about it. I think you would need, as that metaphysic continues to disintegrate, I think that you will have, the abuse of the system is almost inevitable.
And if liberalism collapses, is that a bad thing in your eyes?
Depends how, So again,
you don't mind collapsing, just how it collapses.
Well, I would say that if people were to return to a sort of more robust metaphysic around it, and then the good things that I'm identifying liberalism were to continue, that would be fine, I think, or that would, fine, I mean, that would, I think, be a large part of having an improved sense of what it means to preserve the conditions of human flourishing. If it collapses in the sense that we move towards something very different, where the very framework can't survive because of the push of various contemporary challenges like secularization or multiculturalism in certain forms. Or
radical religious authoritarianism?
Well, exactly, and certainly any kind of suggestion that a theocracy would be the solution is, I think, completely fictitious. I mean, any utopian proposition, I think, like that is will err. Yeah.
In fact, and this in our series, I've been learning this, that one of the marks of the truly liberal person is, in this sense, is they're anti-utopian. Mm-hmm. They're anti-perfectionist. Mm-hmm. They're aware that life has compromises. It's not entirely zero-sum, of course, but there are compromises to be made, and anyone who promises you the perfected human being or the perfect society is going to be a terrible tyrant and destructive. I think that's true, even of the kingdom of God on earth being imposed by human forces.
And we saw that, didn't we, in some instances. I think I don't want to be too harsh, but perhaps we saw that in Calvin's Geneva. I'm not sure, but...
Well, he's not here to defend himself, so
indeed,
we can't say.
So, indeed.
It's true, there have been projects.
Yeah.
There have been projects, Christian projects, other projects, to try and to build the perfect life on earth. On the whole, it seems to me they have been the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in that sense, you're still a liberal.
Yeah, in that sense, I'm happy to defend the heart of the liberal project. Again, it just is one that's incomplete. Yeah.
Thank you, Rohan.
Thanks,
well,
Rohan.
on that somewhat, what can I say, equivocal note, I want to thank you, Rohan, very much for the conversation. Very interesting indeed. On the whole fundamental issue of, does liberalism need a metaphysic, or can it survive incomplete and secular? This has been Liberalism in Question, another of the podcasts from us here at the Centre for Independent Studies. I'm Rob Forsyth. Thank you for watching.